There we go. Start that. And we'll get back into our presentation. Okay. So in Edmonton, the project that we proposed and will be implementing really has two kind of key streams, so to speak. So again, the project is the funding to Homeward Trust is intended to meet these two needs. So I'll provide a really kind of high level overview of what they are, and then we'll get into a little bit more detail post. But largely it breaks into two. So the first we're referring to as Rapid Housing Reserve Fund, largely another colloquially referring to it as kind of flexible funding, but really what this funding is intended to do is to remove financial barriers to accessing housing or exiting chronic homelessness that don't typically exist in our community. So, for example, in Edmonton, we have a fairly robust system for accessing typical housing startup costs, so things like damage deposits or first month's rent, but not necessarily for maybe non-traditional ways of accessing or exiting homelessness through things like co-housing or interim housing or temporary accommodations that result in exiting homelessness. So really what this initiative is seeking to do is support individuals experiencing homelessness, with the primary barrier of exiting homelessness being financial, and then to provide funding directly to vendors to ensure that those barriers are removed and someone can exit homelessness really rapidly and with no barrier. And the second stream of the project is really focusing on landlord engagement and creation of expanded inventory. So again, I'll get into that in more detail, but largely what we're seeking to do here is to provide financial support to offset operating costs for both private and nonprofit landlords. And in return for that operating expense commitment, to have those landlords make commitments to affordable housings for individuals experiencing chronic homelessness for 24 months. So again, just a quick overview, but again, we'll get into a little more detail on that just to make sure we're differentiating the two streams of the project. So landlord engagement and then flexible funding to reduce barriers to accessing homelessness or exiting homelessness. So with that, kind of just thinking about, this statement around if we're successful in this project, what we will have accomplished. So again, in the flex funding or rapid housing reserve fund, if we're successful in implementing that, we would expect that we would really immediately eliminate financial barriers to self-resolution. We would be expediting access to housing, access to funding for the purpose of housing, and we would really be promoting individuals' ability to self-guide their own housing solutions. And then in the landlord engagement space, we would be really seeking to achieve three things. One being expanding that inventory of new affordable housing units. We acknowledge that the work to end homelessness and the role that landlords and market housing plays in that is really critical. And now more than ever, we hear from agencies doing housing work all the time that the inventory of housing or accessible affordable housing units has been shrinking or is less accessible than it's been in the past. So really seeking to expand that. Excuse me. Additionally, looking to create access to existing affordable housing units. So another common theme in our community is that there's social housing providers or nonprofit housing providers that do have units. They're not always typically prioritized for singles or individuals experiencing homelessness. So looking at, really emphasizing that additional access to those units. And then lastly, and of equal importance, is to really, again, ensure that units that are aging out, so to speak, or housing stock that is really falling out, has at risk of falling out of affordability through redevelopment or displacement, that we're really targeting those units so that we don't lose them from future opportunities for folks experiencing homelessness to access. So just to kind of level set a bit around what we're trying to solve through this work. Quickly, there's kind of three key roles in community. And one thing I think is really important to emphasize through this, as I said earlier, Homeward Trust as the community entity applied for and is receiving this funding, but it's of the highest importance that any of this work that we're engaging in is led by community and is engaging with community. And when I say that, I mean individuals that are doing the work in the community, the housing teams, the agencies doing the housing work, our partners in the landlording space and property management space, Indigenous housing providers and experts around Indigenous homelessness, youth homelessness, individuals with lived or living experience, and so on and so forth. This is what we mean when we say community. So really, the outcome is that it's not a project that Homeward Trust is doing in isolation, but it's being administered by Homeward Trust on behalf of and with the community at large. So again, just kind of briefly describing our role in doing that is to really administer the funding and execute the project objectives, and evaluate and report our findings throughout the project. One of the initial steps of this work was the development of a steering or guiding committee. And as I said, kind of highlighting what some of those key community roles are, ensuring that we have stakeholders or partners around a table to help Homeward Trust administration in developing the project, but also to ensure that we're really every step that we're taking along the pilot is grounded and informed by its initial intentions, and that it's supported and enrolled part of the community. And then lastly, the role of the existing housing sector. So there's folks on the call, I'm sure, that do either direct housing work or participate in or work for an organization that does housing work. That that work, of course, continues and is critical. This project is to essentially add another tool to the tool belt of that work that's already happening, and make it easier to do the work that they do. So getting in a bit more detail, again, apologies for the acronyms. We're still kind of ironing out how we want to most effectively refer to the two project streams, but the RHRF, essentially the flex funding that I was speaking about, really its intent is to increase our overall system housing outcomes by between 100 and 125 individuals over the next 12 months. And the way that we'll be doing that is by providing one-time funding up to $4,000 per individual or family to reduce those financial barriers to accessing housing really timely and without barriers. So again, it's important to emphasize that this is not duplication of what exists currently in terms of housing startup costs, such as first month's rent or damage deposits or utilities, things like that. There's other funding sources that exist in our community that currently are addressing those gaps to an extent. This is a stream of funding that's, again, looking at less traditional or more creative self-guided resolution to those experiences of homelessness. This is kind of a slide kind of repositioning as of what I've said. So really what we're looking at for those self-identified housing solutions, they could be room rentals or short-term accommodations, co-residing, renting a room from a family member, so on and so forth. Again, there's opportunity for folks to self-resolve through market housing and access this funding without necessarily being enrolled in a housing team as well, to access housing through market housing. Family reunification or transportation to home communities is another area that's eligible within this space. So again, it's intended to be flexible and have a lot of range of application. And we want to, again, look at ways to think outside the box, so to speak, around what's stopping folks from accessing the resources they need to exit homelessness. Briefly, just a little bit of eligibility. As you might expect, as we do this work, while it is flexible by nature, there's some limitations to what the funding can be applied to, and some operational consideration around making sure that the funding is actually resulting in advancing people's housing plans and making sure that they are set up for success, and that we're not providing funding to really not result in a housing outcome. So there's work that's necessary around ensuring that individuals and families do have at least a base level of eligibility prior to accessing the resource. And so this is just a bit of a description of what you might look for in that sense. Obviously, anytime there's housing work happening, whether that's self-guided or participant-led. Participation in the housing plan is important. We want to make sure that the eventual housing outcome is sustainable and appropriate and so on and so forth. So there's work that happens in that space as well, or that will happen for sure. Yeah, more fulsomely, these are eligible costs that might be considered within this flexible funding. A lot of what I've already said, but again, we're wanting to be as expansive as possible, limit exclusions within reason and within eligibility of the funding. But again, the intent is to not duplicate what we already have in our system, but create access to funding or costs that typically go unfunded, but could result in a housing outcome. So switching gears a bit now to the landlord engagement kind of stream of the project. So again, the outcome or the goal of this stream of the project is to add 50 new units of affordable housing into our inventory as a system, as a collective system. We want to, as I said, expand inventory of market units. We want to create additional access to existing affordable units, and we want to limit housing stock that is at risk of aging out from being redeveloped and pricing out individuals who need affordable housing. We talked about, I think I introduced a little bit briefly around how we intend to do that. So largely it's a initiative that is offering operating expense coverage and other resources to landlords that we don't currently have available to them. And in return, the commitment from the landlord is to provide their unit to the housing system at a rate of 80% of what is CMHC market rent. So you may know CMHC offers market rent targets for locations and neighborhoods across the country, and that's the same in Edmonton. Excuse me. And we would be seeking that landlord to commit their unit for the purpose of housing someone experiencing chronic homelessness at 80% of that rate for a period of 24 months. So again, this is largely, we anticipate the benefit that will be most accessed would be the coverage of operating expenses up to $10,000 per available unit. So this could be, landlord units that were damaged previously by a non-housing support program participant or by general public. Their previous tenant, their unit was damaged. They don't have the operating capital to cover, the restoration of the unit, or if that unit has aged to the point of there's core pieces of the unit that have exceeded their lifespan. So a good example would be if there's flooring in the unit that is 40 years old and has been damaged and is needing repair, to be able to cover some of that operating expense to bring the unit back to acceptable condition, up to $10,000. And again, in return for a commitment of affordability for 24 months. These are some other areas that we intend to explore. Again, going back to my comments earlier around the need for continuous improvement and evaluation of this project, some planning and thinking around other ways that we can provide benefits and initiatives to landlords to participate in this work. We talked about the operating cost coverage. There's also opportunity to engage with landlords around offering financial reimbursement for ways that they're able to refer colleagues or refer other units to this program. But again, really expanding what's available to the community to really enroll and recruit landlords that might otherwise have not been able or willing to work in this space with us. So additionally, part of this project, there's a few staff members that are here at Homeward Trust that are focused exclusively on this work. One of them being a landlord engagement liaison who will be really providing dedicated support to landlords, both in kind of that mediation and conflict resolution. It's in support of if they are working with an existing housing team or if they're not, but ensuring that landlords have a dedicated contact through this project that should things hit speed bumps, so to speak, that there's really individualized and personalized support offered through a landlord engagement role, as well as assisting in unit turnover and making sure that the landlord and their future tenant is a right match, both for the tenant and the landlord. So work around making sure that if a landlord has a unit that's within a building that's predominantly seniors, ensuring that we're working within our coordinated access system and our housing partners to make sure that the landlord, the future tenant of that unit is in alignment with what the landlord is anticipating their tenant to be. So some kind of key next steps for how we'll engage in this project. The funding for this project began October 1. The kind of 2-month phase of the project was around planning and implementation. So as I said, we've been in the process of onboarding some key project staff members. We've been creating and implementing a steering and guiding committee that's started the work. And as we enter into December, we're beginning into the actual execution phase of the project. And so kind of one of the first key steps of that will be to have our project team providing really sector-focused information sessions. I think the plan is to host a series of 3 of them, with the intended audience being really anyone that any staff members or agencies or teams that either work directly in the housing support space or work adjacent to it, and the work that they do overlaps with individuals experiencing homelessness. We're intending to provide a similar presentation to today's to share that information, make sure that the folks doing the actual housing work are aware of the resource and that they're empowered to access it and to support their participants in accessing it. As I said, the project will really kind of kick off through the month of December and into the new year. And again, being a kind of a 10-month window of program execution, followed by a really robust project evaluation. And that work happens throughout. We're going to be doing a great deal of, as I said, kind of continuous learning and continuous improvement throughout. But ultimately, the final kind of product of the project would be for Homeward Trust to develop an evaluation report for community around the impact that we made together on this work, to also help inform continuous improvement to the system and to the work that we all do. We want to make sure that the learnings from this project are brought forward and are understood so that if we do have the impact that we intend to, that future funding decisions and future investment into the space can be reflective of that. So. Lastly, I just wanted to share some contact information for folks that are part of our project team on this. So if there's folks on the call that are really eager to learn more or want to start engaging with this work, Jamie is our project coordinator. Her contact is there. And Karina is our landlord engagement liaison, and her contact is there. So really would encourage folks to reach out if they're interested to know more about the work. But as I said, we're kind of moving out of that planning and implementation phase and into the execution phase. So hopefully we'll have opportunity to meet with other folks and other agencies in a similar capacity and share this information as I have done today. So that's it for my presentation. We're quite quick today. I know we had an hour booked aside. I know there may be questions or comments, things that maybe weren't clear around how I've described this work, but I'll maybe stop there and create a bit of space if folks want to ask any questions they had about the work or comments, if they think we're on the right track or not. Feel free to use the chat as well if you had any questions. Um, if there's any folks as well that would like us to follow up with them to make sure that they're included in any further information sessions. I know there's some folks on the call that work for organizations that do housing work, so we want to make sure that we're including all of them in those information and planning sessions, and making sure that those teams have access to this resource. Maybe the last thing I'll say is, again, the resource is, as is a directive of the federal government through the Reaching Home program, really emphasizes the role of a coordinated entry system or coordinated access system. Folks on the call might know what I mean when I say that, but really when we talk about who the end user of this work is, it's individuals that are identified on our by name list as experiencing chronic homelessness. That's the priority population to be served. So in other words, who can access the program? It's really anyone that is experiencing chronic homelessness, whether they're known to the system or not, and whether they're working directly with the housing team or not. They're eligible for accessing either of these resources. And similarly for landlords and nonprofit landlords, there's no exclusionary criteria. Any landlord that's willing to work in this program is eligible for the funding as described. So. Oh, sorry, I muted myself. I got a question, Lauren. Um, so how is the flex funding different from the supported referral program? Several of the eligibility and short-term aspects seem similar. Yeah, so it's a really good question. And one of the things we are really wanting to ensure we're doing when we're doing these type of engagements is for those that are working within existing housing streams, that there's really a great deal of clarity on where it's supplementing versus where it's not duplicating. So for those on the call that are not familiar, supported referral is a program that organizations can access that are doing either direct housing work or direct housing adjacent work in supporting individuals who are working within those programs through financial support to resolve their homelessness. So Lauren, how I would respond to that is a couple of things. So supported referral is, again, limited to those kind of core housing startup costs being access to damage deposits, first month's rent, et cetera. And additionally to that, one of the kind of program model fidelity items for supported referral is that an individual, in order for someone to access supported referral, that the expectation would be that they're already participating in existing programming with that organization. So a good example would be if an organization offers a financial literacy program in the community, and one of the participants of that financial literacy program happens to be experiencing homelessness, and their barrier to exiting homelessness is financial, that financial literacy program could access damage deposits and first month's rent, so that that person can access housing while they continue to participate in that financial literacy program. So that's kind of a one differentiator. So in the case of the flexible funding, that in the access to the funding isn't part of existing programming. So whether somebody is participating in a financial literacy program or not, they can be eligible for flexible funding. And then separate to that is there's an expanded, again, flexibility of what's eligible within this stream versus supported referral being focused on that damage deposit and first month's rent, where an individual might be part of their self-guided resolution is that they're going to be co-residing with family at a cost for a period of a few months, followed by a housing search for a more permanent housing placement. That's an acceptable outcome. And noting that that doesn't necessarily necessitate enrollment into a program, meaning that the program administering the flex funding isn't expected to provide follow-up support for that individual. Let me know, Lauren, in the chat if that didn't answer your question. Otherwise, I'm going to move on, Joshua. Okay, good. What did clicked on this link and now it's opened up my whole screen. Hold on a second. Would it be helpful to add program access information to the Edmonton Housing Directory? Yeah, interesting. This is timely and so a couple thoughts on this, Joshua. There's a few things. So one of the pieces of work that Homeward Trust has undertaken and is really a critical part of our role in kind of system coordination is the need to have a resource like you've linked that is entirely exhaustive of all housing resources in community. There's been efforts throughout the years to, I think what you've linked here is was developed by formerly AHS addiction mental health programming, and was intended to provide a bit of a system map around what's available for housing. So to answer your question, yes, we absolutely would want to ensure that this type of programming is reflected in a system map. There's work, like I said, that's happening on our side of things to redevelop a really robust and externalized system map that would capture this type of programming that's available in community, but as well as all other forms of housing supports or housing adjacent supports in communities, so that if any individual who's experiencing homelessness or is supporting someone who's experiencing homelessness has a dedicated and single link to access all of those resources in their community. So yes, and we need to continue to work on that development of system mapping and make sure that that's externalized to folks that are doing the work in community. So similarly, Joshua, let me know if that doesn't answer your question, but I appreciate the highlighting of, again, expanding community awareness of resources is an important piece of work. Interesting. Can I ask, Joshua, were you working or do you currently work within addiction and mental health with Recovery Alberta or Alberta Health Services? Is that the background for this?
I do, but that wasn't the context at the directory. That was an off the side of the desk working in our personal times project, but I do work with Recovery Alberta with provincial addiction and mental health.
Right. Yeah, and that's great. And it's funny that you're bringing this up because it's been a kind of a standing item for some work that we've done with Recovery Alberta around, the ownership of, so to speak, of a document like this, and ensuring that as a housing and homelessness system planning organization like Homeward Trust, the role that we play in developing that and co-developing that with other funders and other system partners, and that's a great resource that currently exists, and we need to continue to expand on it and ensure that it's as up to date as possible, so that, like you said, it's not off the side of someone's desk. It's a core part of our work. Any other questions or comments? Again, we'll look to share far and wide those information sessions. So if there's staff or colleagues that weren't able to participate today, that they're, made aware of this this new initiative, and that we can really, again, as a community, make sure that it is as successful as it can be, and we need folks to participate with us on it. So I'll maybe pause one last time for any last questions. Okay, and I realize I took my screen down, but I'll just also put my email here in the chat for anyone that wanted to connect, post, and we'll leave it at that. So if there was no other questions, thanks again for spending a bit of time. Oh, wait, one last thing came in. Yeah, Nico, it will for sure. So the flexible funding, again, regardless of whether or not a participant accessing that funding is enrolled in a housing team or not, One of the eligibility criteria of that would be to access furniture through our Fine Furniture Bank and to cover the costs associated with a furniture pick or startup furniture for that unit. Okay. Great. Yeah. So again, thanks everyone for joining on a Friday, and take care. Reach out if you'd like. Again, my email is in the chat, and hope to hear from you or work on this project with you. Bye, everyone.